I'm really excited to be here to talk about all things space tech, and I'm delighted to have such a group of diverse experts join me to debate this. I'm Kim Kreider, and I'm part of Deloitte Space. We look at ways to help companies in every industry sector leverage space as a growth opportunity for their businesses. It feels like a great time to talk about the possibilities space tech offers, both now and in the future. To help me do this, I've invited a few key experts to share their thoughts and insights. Joining me today are James from Seraphim Capital, Anthony from Satellite View, Claire from ClimateX, Aravind from TerraWatch Space, and Molly from Deloitte Ventures. Okay, so we're going to kick things off with a big one. Why are you here, and why does space tech matter? Molly, what brings you here? Why does space tech matter to you?
I'm here because I believe that every organisation across every industry should be exploring the value and potential of space tech to their business. It really does offer industries the opportunity to innovate, to have greater insights than they had before that data layer was applied, to understand their organisation and their impact on the world better, and to be able to provide new products in the world that are built using space-enabled technology.
Aravind, why does space tech matter to you?
I wanted to work on solving impactful problems. Space technologies are the way to do it. We are collecting more data than we've ever collected in the history of humanity. We can understand more about our planet. We are able to understand what impact we are having on it, and the relationship between the two.
What does the investment landscape look like?
There's been an enormous increase in the amount of capital coming into the space sector. So to put that in context, in recent years, you've seen more capital in a single year invested than in the previous 15 years combined. You've seen year-on-year record levels of investment coming in, investors from around the world investing. So why are they doing that? Because investors are interested in opportunities that have global scale potential and where you're seeing orders of magnitude change, which through the changing economics of space, that's an opportunity that is really resonating with investors. So overall, the investment climate has been extremely healthy. Inevitably, the broader macroeconomic situation that we're all living through has had an impact. So you have seen a drop-off of about 25% in overall investment levels in the last year. But that disguises the fact that actually, even last year, there was a record number of space businesses attracting capital, particularly at the earlier stages. So I think that's a very positive validation that although there is generally a retrenchment from risk, space as a sector, because of its long-term fundamentals, is continuing to attract large amounts of risk capital.
Yeah, that's exciting. Certainly a lot of growth opportunities. Any of you want to talk about where you're seeing the investment landscape go relative to the kinds of businesses that you're in?
I think the important thing is that there are specialist funds like Seraphim that understand space. So they're not just normal VCs. They really understand and they can explain to the other investors about the risks, what's normal, what's acceptable, because space is quite unique in its business.
So having investment firms like Seraphim is very helpful.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think what I'll add to Anthony's point is, I guess the specialist funds like Seraphim come in at the early stage, which is perfect because that's kind of where the external investors tend to be risk averse because they don't understand the technology, they don't know the market potential. But then they can then come in at the perfect time, which is when the companies are at the growth stage, they have demonstrated what they can do. Whether it's an observation company like Satellite View, once they launch and get their data down and prove it to people that this is kind of what the applications are, it's going to become very easy to, both for the customers to understand what these companies are trying to do because they don't understand satellites,
right,
but also the investors who've been investing in, let's assume, software companies.
Really good conversation here. Let's shift a little bit to the industry and the industries themselves that we see leveraging this data most effectively. And we're going to start with energy. And Anthony, I'm going to start with you. So what does the future of the energy sector look like from your perspective when we think about the role of space tech in it?
So I think the big thing which we are very much involved in is energy efficiency. So with a thermal camera, you can detect where in the world you're wasting energy. And so we expose with a consistent, uniform measurement across the globe, whether it's your Scope 3 emissions in your supply chain, your headquarters, or your distribution in the US. It's a consistent measurement And that fills the gap, perhaps for the regulators, where is the benchmark? What's good, what's bad, and can we compare one with the other? So it's very important that we have these standards. And I think the other part is no one data set is sufficient. It's the combination of all our group knowledge which will solve the ultimate customer problem.
And being able to get that global view, as you mentioned, being able to see from space all of the systems at scale, all of the components of a business at scale, and where they might be less efficient from an energy perspective.
Exactly.
Yeah. That broad global view, I think, has always been exciting, and I think it affects many of the industries that we're talking about here. So let's talk a little bit about finance. And Claire, I'm going to turn to you. Is Spacetech relevant to the banking industry?
Oh, absolutely, yes. There's a whole new branch of the finance sector that's called geospatial finance, and this is all about knowing where your assets are and what they're vulnerable to, or what opportunities there are. But you can only know it if you know about the geospatial landscape around your asset. The only way to know this meaningfully at scale is to use Earth observation, so like Spacetech, everything that looks down. And then how is the thing at this location connected to the thing over there? Without actually looking at it, without observing it from above, you cannot make these connections. For any large company, especially within finance, there's no way you're going to send one person out to every single site that you're interested in. You won't have the time, you won't have the resources, but with continuous observation from space, we can see that, we can see it almost instantly. You can have your satellite pass overhead once a day or once a week. You can get really, really up-to-date information on where your assets are, what they're at risk at. From the sort of climate risk perspective, the kind of thing that we look at Climate X, you have to know what your asset is surrounded by to know what it's at risk from. And that can be things like what physically is on the ground. It can also be about what your local weather and climate is like, weather systems that we can see from space. And all that information is vital for understanding where your risk is, and without that, you just can't know it.
I'd build on that. Yeah. There's a general adage about data being the new oil in the 21st century. The reality of space and the kind of technologies we're talking about is that in the very near future, and we're already a long way towards this, every square meter of the Earth is going to have information captured about it every hour at global scale. So just think how profound a data set that is, and then you think about how that might be applied to virtually every sector. So for me, it's a question of not which sectors is it going to most resonate with, it's which sectors is space not going to impact, and there's very, very few.
And I think building on that as well, for the banking market, it's not just driven by regulatory requirements, but there is also that opportunity to innovate. And how do you use satellite data to help you build new products as a bank? So whether that is integrating satellite data to understand the thermal opportunity or the solar potential or the wind potential of specific land parcels, and then take that data and offer better green financing loans and mortgages to some of your customers as a bank. We're definitely seeing clients explore that space as well as a new white space for them beyond just the regulatory pieces.
Yeah. What about insurance? How do you think the insurance industry is going to leverage this?
I think we're already seeing it.
Yeah.
So if we think about the US, again, driven by regulation, but it's already now mandatory to insure your crops. So we're seeing startups respond to that, building out products to actually be able to ensure instant payouts of crop failures, be able to understand where there might be a risk to that crop. And again, that's directly related to an insurance product. But I think, like a lot of what we're seeing with the use of Earth observation data, we'll get to a point where those end users don't necessarily even know it's being fed by that data stream. And kind of like what you were saying, Anthony, it just becomes an extra data layer that we have in our arsenal.
I think one of the big challenges for the the insurance sector is actually quite an existential question, which is the past is no longer necessarily a guide to the future. Why is that? Because of the effects of climate change. You're seeing increasingly large impact but unpredictable climate-related events that are causing massive issues and massive losses within the insurance sector. So finding better ways to price risk and determine what might happen is really fundamental to the future of the entire insurance sector, and it's only really through the application of space data that we believe there is a solution to those sort of challenges.
Yeah.
So the fun thing about these unprecedented events is they're not actually unpredictable. They are entirely predictable. They are already existing within the climate system. But to know where you're actually going to see the impact, you have to know a bit about what's there. There's also this question of validation and verification, especially when you're talking about insurance and short-term weather-related impacts. Where are you currently impacted by a flood, for example? And you can see this from satellite, and you can use this to verify your future models. So if the weather increases and changes more like this, then we know that these areas are more at risk of flooding because we have seen it from the satellite previously.
Yeah, and one thing that I guess it's not appreciated as much is also the ability of the entire world to leverage a technology, because there's going to be data, or there's already data available on a global scale, as James was saying, which means that, you know, whether you're from a developing country, a bank in a developing country can use the same objective, you know, data set, and companies, or, you know, companies outside in the West as well, can also, you know, leverage the same technology. I don't think we've, you know, appreciated the equalizing perspective of Spacetech that brings to the other industries of the world, and we're already seeing that. And, you know, I have kind of a small theory that also the developing world will also kind of leapfrog in the way they use space technologies, because in the West there have been, you know, the past ways of, you know, in the insurance industry as an example, there have been some past ways of, you know, going about doing things, and now they have to adapt to how they can use space technology. Whereas if you go to the developing world, you know, you're already seeing adoption. You know, in some countries there are, you know, credit scores being verified and, you know, provided to customers and the insurance companies with satellite data. Well, you know, the good thing is nobody knows that there's satellite data being used for that purpose, because, you know, it's happening in the background, but it's already being adopted, right? So which is incredible, because yeah, as I mentioned, it's such an equalizing force because of its objectivity and its global scale.
Yeah, for sure. What is the impact, do you think, of space tech on the sustainability agenda of companies?
Yeah, I think we're seeing kind of that opportunity to respond to the growing carbon market. So again, how do you validate your carbon credits are true and they're the value that you're being sold at? We've seen a lot of response to that market. We've seen a secondary market for that pop up, which is insuring those carbon credits, again, using satellite data. I think when we talk about space, we know space tech and sustainability kind of go on top of each other. And it's no surprise then that when we see clients wanting to experiment and explore with space-enabled technology, it quite often is tying to their sustainability agenda and what's important from that perspective.
Any other thoughts on this topic, Anthony, from your perspective, from what Satellite View does?
Yes, I think more examples. So people are turning more to solar power. And for example, our phenomenology helps detect where the solar panels fail. And so it's a second order effect. So not only where you might want to site them, when they're installed, how they might fail, and improvements in the technology.
Yeah, being able to have that space view of all of your all of your solar fields, and really understanding how they're performing, because they're there to, you know, support your sustainability agenda, but if they're not optimized and efficient.
Well, I think there's multiple actors. People are putting money into green funds to build solar farms, so they expect them to work. If you're the maintenance crew, you want to be able to perform the job as quickly as possible. Right. And even the off-taker is assuming that 50 megawatt farm is going to give 50 megawatts when the wind stops blowing. If it's not, you want to know in advance so you can take the offsets of that.
Yeah, for sure. Are there any other exciting applications with space tech that we're seeing in the market?
In the context of climate and sustainability?
Any field. What excites you the most, James?
Well, as a specialist investor, everything excites me. So the change that we're talking about the space sector going through is transforming the sector in a few short years. It's entirely possible that it will be cheaper to launch a kilo into orbit than it will be to ship it from the UK to Australia. So you think about everything that's ultimately going to enable. So I think we really see the evolution of the market in 3 stages, and we're still in the first stage. Stage 1 is the deployment of digital infrastructure in the sky. These constellations of hundreds and thousands of satellites that we've been talking about, all the data and connectivity that's delivering back down to Earth. Phase 2 is then the way in which That data and that connectivity is used by all of the sectors terrestrially, and we do believe it will be almost every sector that will be impacted. And then thirdly, we're now starting to see the advent of the in-space economy, which is going to develop over the course of the next decade. It might sound like science fiction, but sooner than people might realize, we're going to be manufacturing in space, we're going to be doing drug discovery in space, we're going to be doing energy production in space, and a whole host of other things. So right across the spectrum, there's enormous change and exciting developments.
Yeah. Well, let's round things off a bit. And to do so, I'd like to hear your predictions on the role of space tech for non-space organizations in the year 2040. And we're going to go around the table for this one and give everybody a chance to talk about your predictions for the role of space tech in 2040. So Anthony, we're going to start with you.
So my prediction is that Earth observation data will become part of the information system that we use on our phones, and it'll give fantastic insights without us even knowing. So perhaps you'll be able to discern which supermarket to shop in based on their green footprint, and everything will be labeled. The world needs to go on a carbon diet, and one thing that's missing is we don't have the carbon footprint of everything that we touch. So as a consumer and as a business owner, you don't know which entity is most green. So have complete transparency on that available anywhere. I think that will come.
Okay, thank you. Ervin, what is your prediction for the role of space tech for non-space organizations? And we're looking out to 2040.
Yeah, that's 17 years down the lane. I think my prediction is they're going to be using products or they're going to be touched by space, but they're not going to know it. That's kind of how some companies and some organizations might know it because they've taken that role strategically, actively into developing a technology or adopting that technology. But then majority of the world, and it's already happening, and it's not really a prediction because it seems like I'm predicting the past really, because we're already being touched by space and we're not knowing it, and weather is a good example of that. But in the future, it's going to be enabling more applications. One application that I always talk about is, imagine if we have an application, and it already kind of exists, where you can just go to an app and A, look at the carbon footprint, B, where you're living, is it going to be safe for the next 5 years, next 10 years, so you're making an infrastructure decision as an organization. So all of that are going to be available, but people are just not going to know that satellite data enabled that. They provided a risk index for, is it a good place to buy this house or not? Yeah. Or for a government to make that decision. Yeah. Should we move people here in the next 10 years? Yeah. They're going to make that decision. Somebody's going to tell them, that's a good place to build this infrastructure or, build whatever they're trying to build, but they're not going to know that satellite data has enabled it, and maybe that's probably the success story of the space industry once we get to that point.
Yeah, it becomes ubiquitous and embedded in everything we do.
100%.
Yeah. James, what's your prediction?
Yeah, similar. I'd sort of extend that and say prediction is in 2040 there won't be a space sector. That might sound gloomy, but actually quite the opposite. I think by 2040, space will be such an integral part of every aspect of our daily lives and the broader world that it will just be a natural extension of everything from logistics companies to tourism. We might even be going to the moon for a holiday by them. Manufacturing, telecommunications, banking, insurance. Everything will actually be ultimately driven by space in some manifestation or another. But I don't believe that by 2040 people will be explicitly making decisions based on, do I procure this from space for my business? I just think it will be implicit in everything that we do.
Yeah. Similar to what Ervin was saying, and it just becomes part of the way we live. It gives us a better way to make decisions because we have insights that we couldn't necessarily have on a global scale. Yes. Claire, what do you think?
Similarly, I would say the ultimate level of optimization. You know even where to send your shipping boats and via which path down to the 100 meters, because you know exactly what the surface of the ocean looks like on that day, which way the wind is blowing, how much cargo is on the shipping container and where it's coming from and where it's going. Optimizing your entire infrastructure end to end, and even how you move people around within it. And all of this information can come from Spacetech.
Molly,
Okay,
your
mine's
prediction.
about the in-orbit economy, so very different to everybody else. But I think in 2040, we'll see more non-space organizations looking to access in-space services. So whether that be a pharmaceutical company looking to do drug discovery in space and doing their first in-space mission and exploring what that roadmap looks like, because this is by no means new. It's been happening for the last couple of decades on the International Space Station. But as we see the constraints around that lower, it become easier and more opportunities to have one of those seats to do that, I think we'll see more organizations exploring those options to kind of maintain that competitive edge for them.
That's really exciting.
Yeah, we'll have hundreds, if not thousands, of people in space at any given moment by 2040, both permanently established on the moon, proliferation of commercial space stations, which are being developed now. I'm not going to go so far as to say we'll be colonizing Mars yet, but everything up until that point, including exploiting space-based resources to help preserve the ecosystems that we have here on Earth, will be viable and very valuable businesses in 20 years' time.
And you think we will have overcome the limitations of being able to work and live and operate in space?
We will have overcome some of those to enable us. Human ingenuity is the basis of the modern world, and I see no reason why we shouldn't be very optimistic about what we're going to be doing in space.
Yeah. And I don't think we would be living in space for the sake of living in space, but I do believe that there is a future where space becomes our next innovation lab. And there will be researchers and scientists who go on space missions to uncover the next discovery, whether that's a drug, a medicine, whether that is building tissue fibers out in space laboratories. I think that's where the future will head.
That's exciting.
And how about you, Kim? What's your prediction for 2040?
Well, Molly, I think that my prediction is not far off from many of what you all have said. Fundamentally, I certainly think that by 2040, the use of space tech, the use of data from space will go from novel to normal. It'll just be part of our everyday life. And it'll be accessible down to the individual, right? I love what you said about having the data just available on your phone and being able to use information in your everyday life, and not really worrying about where it's coming from. So I do think that it'll certainly be integrated into our everyday lives and will go from being this unique, specialized area to something that we do. I also think, though, that, and James, you mentioned this, more and more non-space organizations, I think, are going to look to not just what we can do with the data and the information from space to create some competitive advantage for our business, but they're going to start thinking more broadly about what could we do in space. And the technology will enable that. The technology, the platforms, the availability of human transport systems in space, laboratories in space, I think will just open up a whole new set of innovation where non-space organizations will realize that we could actually do things in space that will help our businesses down here on Earth. All right, we're going to bring this to a close. Emerging applications of space-enabled technology are starting to influence our lives and businesses in ways that can't be ignored. We've heard about some really interesting points here today, talking about the proliferation of space-based capabilities, the ability to leverage data on a global scale that's created some normalization effects around the world between developing countries and more developed countries are all going to be able to take advantage of this data. We talked about the growth in investment and massive growth in investment. And James, you made the really good point that it's not which companies are going to be leveraging space, but which companies are not, which are going to be very few and far between. The good news is that the investors are really excited, which makes the companies really excited because they have the opportunity to get their capabilities up there to prove what it can do and to get that data into the companies and the businesses on the ground that can actually do something with it. The ability to leverage climate data in particular in this rise of Earth observation, to be able to respond to climate change in a new way, to be able to level the playing field, as it were, around the world on where the impacts of climate really are and give companies and governments the ability to more effectively respond. proactively respond to what those predictions are. And then the opportunity to just continue to invest, to continue to seed where this growth can go, to be able to leverage space in ways that we haven't thought about yet, to be able to be in space and working in space as a new innovation lab of the future, where we can really experiment with future medicines, future technologies that we aren't able to see yet here today, and to make our lives better here on Earth. This has been a really interesting discussion here today, and I want to thank our guests for sharing their expertise. I want to thank all of you for joining us. We hope this conversation has inspired you when it comes to the possibilities space tech offers both now and in the future.